Good morning. Today we have a lot to talk about, so we're just going to jump right in. I want to ask, what do you have for us today, Senator Black?
Okay, well, Morgan, always good to have you here. The first thing I want to talk about is I just want to touch on the growing opposition to Netanyahu and to what Israel's doing in Gaza, on the West Bank, and all of the other wars that they're fighting. It's interesting. I think there's a major, very important shift in public opinion. There were two related votes in the U.S. Senate yesterday, and they were votes to cut off certain arms to Israel. They weren't important arms, but it was very important symbolically, the vote. And at this point, there are 20, I believe it's 27 Democrats, I think they're all Democrats in the Senate, who are voting to cut off certain arms supplies to Israel. There's really just a growing movement sweeping through the Democratic Party in opposition to the genocide, what many consider a genocide, the starvation, the attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank, were totally unarmed, defenseless Palestinians who are under occupation by the Israelis, and they're being attacked, they're being murdered, their homes are being burned. And these are people who are under the law of Israel, under Israeli law enforcement protection, but there is no protection. It's very much like the kind of thing that happened in Nazi Germany under Kristallnacht, where Jewish properties and so forth in Germany were raided and destroyed. And we've got a very similar situation happening in the West Bank, where while everyone's attention is diverted to the mass starvation in Gaza, the Jewish settlers, very extreme, very terroristic group of Israelis, are just attacking innocent, helpless, defenseless people. And they beat to death one American, a fellow from Tampa that went over to Tampa, Florida, who went to visit his relatives. And I think all of this is just, it's a level of outrage that Netanyahu has really inspired this just sort of the worst inhumanity. And he's elevated these settlers, given them enormous prominence. And anyway, it's quite a horror that's occurring in Gaza, in the West Bank, and people are just fed up with it. Of course, the United States has been the bankroller and the arms merchant for the whole thing, and people just don't like it.
Yeah, on that point, we have the starvation in Gaza, you kind of alluded to it, has taken the lives of 83 children to date. And that's just from starving to death. The other, deaths or bombings, and it's completely atrocious. And, another important shift that's happening is this new whistleblower that has come out, this Anthony Aguilar from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He's getting on news sources such as Tucker Carlson, Democracy Now!, broad scope of the political spectrum is coming together to hear this guy's story on what he witnessed in Gaza, which was a lot of what he attributes to incompetence. The fact that some of these aid distributions sites are within active combat zones. So these Palestinians have to get up from areas that are deemed safe, as safe as they can be, to active combat zones to get minimal amounts of food. So his story,
Of course, the Israelis control the food. They, they have a total cutoff of the food, and then they have occasionally allowed a few food trucks to go in, and then the army just sits there, and when the starving people rush in, they just mow them down. They just gun them down. And it was I think it was the Sunday before this passed, but anyway, very recently, they killed 93 people who were just running with rice bowls to come and try to get some food to take back to their children. Just gunned them down. I mean, this is stuff that, there were, back when the Nazis were in power in Germany, that this is the kind of thing that people were criticizing. And I think the Israeli people deserve better, more mature leadership than they have. And I really hope that something can change there.
Yeah, that's to put it lightly. Yeah, I would agree. Another important point that this the former Green Beret and Lieutenant Colonel and Anthony Aguilar put was that the food that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is giving to the Palestinians, which is from American tax dollars, is food that requires water to eat, but we don't provide them water because the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says it's not profitable to also give them water. So I think that just shows the moral decay of what their true aspirations of trying to feed these people is. It's more of a profit-seeking ambition rather than, to correct this sort of wrong that the American government has partaken, in demolishing Gaza with the weapons that we, funded, but now we're also funding supposedly the humanitarian effort to correct this or somewhat keep these people alive, and it's also being tainted with nefarious ambitions. So I found that to be very interesting in his testimony.
Yeah. Well, with that, I want to switch to our second introductory issue this morning. Now you won't see any big headlines on this, but I track the war in Ukraine very closely, and for at least 6 months, there's been sort of what seems like almost a stalemate on the battlefield. It's not actually stalemated, but things are moving rather slowly. The Russians are moving forward on all fronts, but not rapidly. Just in the last week, though, there has been a dramatic change in the rapidity with which the Russians are moving forward, and the importance of the areas that they are about to seize or have just taken over. They fought about a year-long battle for the Ukrainian fortress at Chasiv Yar. Very, very important place. It was a small place. Population, I don't know whether the population was once 10 or 15,000. Not a big place, but geographically very strategic. And it was sort of the linchpin for a number of Ukrainian strongholds. And the loss of Chasiv Yar, the city has fallen this past week. It sort of allows the Russians to outflank several other very important places. At the same time, the Russian summer offensive is on the verge of taking over Seversk, which is a relatively important place, and a much more important place called Pokrovsk, which really is probably the most important single element of the Ukrainian defensive lines. Uh, the Russians lost a tremendous number of troops trying to take Pokrovsk, but they have finally managed to actually infiltrate groups of troops into the city itself, sort of undermining the whole structure of the defenses. And it looks like Pokrovsk is about to fall. And when it does, it sort of breaks the Ukrainian line in a very substantial way. Another city, Konstantinivka, is very much in danger. So all of a sudden, after this relative calm on the battlefront, it's like the Russians have finally reached a point where simultaneously a number of very important places are falling or about to fall. And I also note that there was a big anti-draft riot that occurred in I think it was in Kiev, where the Ukrainian, mostly Ukrainian women, rose up and just said, "Hey, look, you're taking our fathers, you're taking our brothers, you're taking our husbands, or taking our sons, and we're just not taking it anymore. You're sending them out just to die for nothing." And so this is a situation that we have now. I think you're going to see some more dramatic news breaking out over the next couple of weeks.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's important to note, I believe that they raised the conscription age to, I believe, in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken, in Ukraine, where they're basically admitting that you have the youth have been annihilated. There's no other way to reconcile that. They're raising the age constantly, and that's another reason why you have this revolt. I believe when the war first broke out 2 years ago, and they raised the age to, I believe, 25. Pardon me, I think they lowered the age, and people were kind of freaking out. And now you're going the opposite spectrum, and you're taking more men that way, and it's what other people have described it as, a meat grinder. Both sides, it's a stalemate. It's trench warfare, and it's absolutely heinous that this is still continuing. And you have the president of the United States, who, when he was elected, postured that he was going to have this, diplomatic talks. Placing this tweet out yesterday, proclaiming that he has ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, which is highly concerning, because that is the whole reason why a lot of us who have been speaking out on this war in Ukraine and Russia, at the prospect of a nuclear conflict between 2 nuclear nations. And this is kind of our worst nightmare, is when we see a president of the United States taking this posture, especially when we had seen him at Davos explicitly talking about the dangers of nuclear war, how many nuclear warheads we have, and how people don't reconcile how humanity can just be gone within an instant if we engage down this path. And for him to take this provocative stance, I just want to get your take on it.
Well, no one has ever articulated a rational motivation for the U.S. to be involved in fueling this war right on the Russian border, on the other side of the globe. There's never been a reason. Ukraine was never our ally. Yes, it was an ally of Mr. Fauci, who set up something like 13 germ warfare labs within Ukraine. At least many of us believe that's what their purpose was germ warfare. He would say they were just experimenting with some COVID to see, how it could be
Mhm.
how our enemies could weaponize it by, by doing things. We're trying to see if we can make those things happen just so that we'll see what the enemy might be doing for us. But in any event, other than, very sinister things like that, they've never been an ally. They've always been a deeply corrupt, dysfunctional state. And Russia was happy to work with them on a very respectful basis. And then President Obama, when he was in office in 2014, he overthrew the government and he installed a revolutionary junta and then began this huge military buildup to attack the Russian-speaking areas. And I think eventually there was probably some thought even back at that point of going forward and attacking Russia itself and breaking it into its parts. And there's fantastic wealth in Russia. It is one of the great export nations of the world. It exports, or did export, the greatest amount of natural gas, one of the greatest amounts of oil, the greatest exporter of wheat, greatest exporter of fertilizer, greatest exporter of timber, all sorts of things. It's just an endless array of things. And there are people in charge of huge hedge funds. There are gigantic bank powers in Great Britain and in New York City, where they have invested enormous amounts of time and effort in trying to overthrow Ukraine and then overthrow Russia, with hopes that they can sweep in and buy up properties at pennies on the dollar. And it's not working out well. And as a consequence, there's pressure to up the ante. We must always impose our will on the most distant places on the globe. And it's not working out well. The world is clamoring for peace. We are so sick of the wars. And while there's lots of talk about, well, peace here and peace there, and the fact is we've got a mammoth war going on, raging in Ukraine. No reason on earth for that war. We've got wars in the Middle East. Always it's Netanyahu giving the orders to the United States to attack this one and that one and this one and this one. And we've attacked Libya, and we've attacked Syria, and we've attacked Lebanon and Iran and Iraq and Yemen and the Gaza and the West Bank and everybody on the planet. We are at war everywhere. And I sure hope that we can get some balance back in what we're doing, because nobody is attacking us and we are attacking everybody, and we really need to put an end to it.
Yes, and it often reminds me of the brave action of Tulsi Gabbard when she put out that video on Hiroshima, which, we're about to pass the 80th anniversary of that in the coming days, on the 6th. And in that video, she makes the claim that she wants to bring to the American people that there are people within government and with the realms of power that want to provoke humanity close as possible, if not to a nuclear engagement. So it is up to the people to take this action and stand up against it. And I thought that to be exceptionally brave from her. And it hasn't really gotten as much notoriety, I'm sure, from the power realms that don't want people to see it, but just the gravity of how much courage that took to put that video out and bring that forth to the American people. So I'm constantly reminded by that and encourage people to watch it and and understand what she's truly saying in that is that she's warning you that there are powers that are crazy enough to continue and push us to that brink of extinction.
This is true. I mean, these are people who, for whom their life is all that counts. There's no future. There's no progeny. There's no God. There's just this. There's no right and wrong because there are no men. There are no women. Everything is interchangeable. Everything can be lied about without limitation. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. But with that, I want to get into something that it's not big news, but I thought it was worth doing. And this is an opinion piece in the Washington Post. It was put in there, written by E.J. Dionne. I apologize for mispronouncing. I don't know the name. I recognize it, but I don't know the pronunciation. Dionne, I guess. His article, "The Good News About Murder." Well, in a way, that's an appropriate title for Democrats, but that's not what he means. He means that homicides are way down, and he says, here, what happened and what can we learn? And this is how progressives became crime fighters. I got to say, this just sort of blew the roof off my house, where I thought, I just can't let this go. The idea that progressives have become crime fighters, and this is the reason that the murder rate is plummeting. It was just too much to take. So anyway, the Washington Post put out very clear, very nice chart, and it showed the murder rate. It showed it going up and it showed it going down. Now, what is important is when it started going up and why it started going down. Now, you will see in this chart where the hump is there, how many people we're talking about. I'm not sure whether there could be maybe an excess murder rate of something like 14,000 above the normal rate of murders that's unfortunately become kind of an environment that we live in. But it was a huge bump up. In fact, it was, I think it may have been the largest bump up in history. But what happens if you look in where it starts going up in 2020. Now, for the writer of this article, he says it's COVID. It's probably the little tweak with the pandemic. Folks sitting around home and just nothing to do, so they go out and kill somebody, apparently. Well, that's not the reason. That's not what happened. The reason is crystal clear, because what happened is the Democrats and their media allies had been working, trying to get something that would trigger a racial explosion. And they worked at it with Trayvon Martin, who was killed in 2012 after he, well, it's too much detail to go into, but anyway, that was one racial issue. Then you had Michael Brown, the hands up, don't shoot guy. He never said hands up, don't shoot. But what he did do, in fact, is there was a police officer had told him, hey, you can't just walk down the center of the street and stop traffic. And please get off the roadway And Michael Brown, a hulking, huge guy, came to the police officer's window, reached in, tried to grab his gun to kill him. And fortunately, I think it might have been a state trooper. It's a very, very strong guy, not nearly as big as Michael Brown, but he was able to wrestle with him and keep Michael Brown from getting the gun. In any event, Michael Brown ends up being killed in that. And then you have George Floyd, the poor victim of somebody kneeling on his neck, purportedly. It wasn't kneeling on his neck, by the way. The police department had specific provisions that allowed for it's a neck hold. You don't crush somebody's neck. What you do is you place your knee where they can't rise up without having to push your knee up. So it's actually spelled out. I've read the police procedure in detail. He followed it precisely as he was supposed to do. He's a much smaller guy than George Floyd. George Floyd, in all likelihood, died of a massive overdose of fentanyl, which was clear from the autopsy, and he could not breathe. But it wasn't that he couldn't breathe because of something the police were doing. He couldn't breathe because he had taken fentanyl, and one of the symptoms of a deadly overdose is that you can't breathe. It suppresses your diaphragm. When they did the autopsy on George Floyd, not the paid autopsy, but the official autopsy, which I have read in detail, it said there is no damage to the trachea. There is no bruising to any of the neck tissues. I think it's called the hymenoid bone. Anyway, the Adam's apple. The Adam's apple is almost always broken in a strangulation murder. It was intact. It was undamaged. So there's no bruising of any sort on the neck, but he died. Now, there was a suppressed video. There were 3 videos taken. 2 of them were released to the public. The other one was concealed deliberately. The reason it was concealed is that the first video showed George Floyd being arrested. The other one that they released showed him on the ground with the officer's knee at his neck, and what they didn't show was the intermediate one where George Floyd was being escorted by 2 police. No manhandling or anything. They were just walking on either side of him, walking him over to the police cruiser. And while they were walking him, he began to say, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." Now, people thought he was just trying to be difficult, but he wasn't. He was being quite honest. He could not breathe because the fentanyl was kicking in, and he was beginning to suffocate. Police weren't even touching him at that moment, and he says, "I can't breathe." So anyway, so that's George Floyd. He spent his life in and out of prisons. Most recently, he had been in prison for orchestrating a home invasion robbery where he led the way. He went disguised as a city worker, and he burst in this woman's home, a pregnant woman. He held a pistol at her stomach. She was very pregnant, and he said that he was going to shoot the baby in her belly and kill the baby. And then they all went in. They robbed everything in the house, and then they beat the woman in the face with a pistol, left her pistol whipped and bleeding. He had been in prison for 5 years for that, and he had just been released. So this is a guy who was always in trouble. Media very craftily orchestrated it to make it look like some outrageous event. They skewed the reports, and they sparked racist mobs that looted, burned, rioted, murdered all over the country. And the crime wave was particularly vicious in the Democrat-run cities, where they had reason to prompt these violent uprisings, because it gave them power. It put everybody else on the defensive. And in the schools at the same time, we had public schools where they began teaching this critical race theory, where teachers were dividing the lighter skinned children and labeling them as oppressors, and the other children, they called them oppressed. And they were teaching children to seek out microaggressions. Now, a microaggression might be if I showed up on the channel for you a little bit late and put you under a little bit of pressure for the show or something. It's almost nothing. I mean, everybody is encountering microaggressions in this world, but they were training some of the minorities to view that as a hostile thing that really warranted some sort of a violent outburst. So it was a horrible, horrible time, and it corresponded with the year 2020, with the George Floyd racial uprising around the country. Tremendous spike in murders. There were dozens of police officers who were simply assassinated. Some of them they'd be sitting in their car, relaxing a little bit while they were, taking a break from patrolling, and people would just come up and gun them all down. It was a terrible, terrible time. And what happened then is, if could you show the chart once again? Okay, so you can see it goes on, and there is this huge spike. Now President Trump was in office. His administration was very badly wounded by the Russia collusion hoax, tremendous conspiracy to undermine the government of the United States. And so immediately Trump said, hey, look, I want to restore order. But many of the liberals, both on the Democrat and some on the Republican side, united to block him, to block presidential authority. So George Floyd is killed in May of 2020. The next month, in June of 2020, when all of this tremendous violence is breaking out across the country, cities are being burned, the DOD Secretary, Mark Esper, came out publicly and indicated he just wasn't going to support the president in using troops to restore order. And, one of the basic reasons for having a United States of America was to ensure domestic tranquility. And that's why they made the president, they gave him control of the armed forces. And but there was a cabal of generals who also united to oppose the president, and Colin Powell was among them, sadly. And in any event, they blocked the president from using appropriate force to restore order in the country. And as a consequence of the fact that this Trayvon Martin thing, or not Trayvon Martin, but the George Floyd thing was hyped up in an outrageous fashion. The fact that the hands of the president were tied, the crime just soared out of control. And so what happens then is the murders, the burning, and so forth goes on and on. In 2021, in January, President Biden is sworn in, and then by November of that year, we have this tremendous explosion of smash and grab robberies. In San Francisco, many of the robbers carried guns into these stores, high-end, Louis Vuitton and all of the rich people's stores. They went in and they looted them, and people were terrorized. Nobody dared to stand in the way of these people armed with clubs and weapons and guns. So then along comes election time. The midterm elections for 2022 were kicking off by March of 2022, and you see it plateaus along the top for a while, and then it begins to go down, and it is a straight line. I mean, you can almost just connect that with a ruler, and because it doesn't waver much, it just begins to drop, and it continues to drop until today. And what happens is you have election campaigns kicking off, and you had Republican candidates who were saying, hey, look, vote for me. I'm going to put a stop to this outrageous terror on our streets, the horror of people being chased, buildings being burned, and so forth. And once that happened, and then, of course, Donald Trump kicks off his campaign, and he announces he's going to run for re-election by November 2022, and he links the Democrats to the riots, and he was not particularly subtle about it, and Donald Trump says, our country is now a cesspool of crime. He says this in a 2022 speech, previewing what would come about in his campaign. We have blood, death, and suffering on a scale once unthinkable because of the Democrat Party's effort to destroy and dismantle law enforcement all through America. And during this whole George Floyd uprising, you had Black Lives Matter, you had Antifa that were very prominent in it. Now, Black Lives Matter was not necessarily, it wasn't some all-Black organization. Antifa was principally white elitist, but they prompted this call to defund the police. Let's get rid of police. We don't need police anymore. And then we had calls to do away with bail. So you just, people commit crimes. You didn't even ask them to post bail. They didn't need to come back to court. You just let them out, and that was it. And they began to expunge the records of criminals so that people didn't really pay a price if they got thrown in jail for rape, if they got thrown in jail for murder or something. Well, let's just expunge the record. That was the push, and many records were expunged. So you had this dissembling of the legal structure that maintains law and order within the country, and it really caused a collapse of law and order. You had these prosecutors who were installed with the help of George Soros. And George Soros was very much in favor of the no cash bail, sort of the defund the police, and this idea that you should have equity in crime. In other words, if one race commits a certain number of murders, you have to convict every race of a proportionate number of murders. The problem is that murder is not a proportionate crime. It is not. Rape is not a proportionate crime. And this idea that somehow you'll create a racial balance in criminal prosecutions and this type of thing, it's nonsense. I mean, it's sort of a communistic notion that that has no relation to reality. So I guess, you know, I am very pleased with the results that have occurred as a result, really, of the public backlash. The public was just willing to say, okay, we have had it. We're finished with this pro-crime administration. We're going to throw out the Biden administration. We're going to throw out some other politicians. And as a consequence, now we have gone full circle to where we've got the Washington Post saying, well, you can credit Joe Biden and the liberals for the drop in crime. I don't think so. I think you can credit, and not to be too partisan. I mean, I would love to be able to say, to single out some great Democrats who were really tough on crime. I cannot identify a single Democrat who has ever been strong on the issue of crime. And it bothers me. I wish it weren't that way. Because I'd like to say, okay, there's some Republicans who are weak on crime. Let's get some Democrats who can, you know, box them in the ears and say, look, you're not doing your job. There aren't any. There aren't any. Even the weakest of the Republicans is so much stronger than the strongest of the Democrats on the issue of crime and law and order. So while, you know, I'm more than anxious to credit the Democrats when they do something that is meritorious. I think in some ways they are perhaps getting the upper edge on the issue of war and peace. It's not that they've always been in a good spot there, but they seem to be moving in a somewhat more positive direction. But I guess this just seemed so unfair. The idea that there would be somebody touting the record of the Democrats after they've inspired a movement that has burned out the business districts of every Black city in this country. In fact, years ago when I was a young guy, I built homes, subsidized homes, in a place called Liberty City, Florida. Liberty City, 100% Black, one of the most violent, one of the most deadly neighborhoods in the entire country. And I was building the homes there, and this was, I believe it was just shortly after there had been a great race riot. They burned out all of the business section. And what happens is the good citizens in those communities, they rely on the grocery store. They have to get their their medicine at the pharmacy. They have to have a bank where they can put their money. And I used to feel so sorry for the people who were my customers. You know, we were a small business, small uh, uh, construction company, family owned. I was an officer of the company, but I I remember once there was a fellow named Willie Smith, nice guy, and I had just closed on 2 homes side by side in Liberty City. And the day afterwards, Willie Smith calls me and he says, Mr. Black, he says, I wonder, could I buy some of the siding for this house? Well, I almost had a heart attack because we were, you know, these were little homes, but we were really proud of them. We really wanted to do a good job. And I said, Willie, I said, if there is something wrong with the siding on that house, I said, you don't have to pay a penny. I said, I'm going to take care of it. He said, no. He says, you don't understand, Mr. Black. He says, I got bullet holes. And then he proceeded to explain to me that police had tried to arrest a rapist in the bar across the street. The rapist fled. He pulled out a gun between the houses, began firing at the police. Police started shooting back. I said, okay. I said, Willie, I said, I'll get you some of this siding. I said, you don't have to worry about it. We'll fix it for you. And later that day, I got a call from the woman who had bought the house next door. She said, Mr. Black, she says, could I get some of that siding? I said, don't tell me. I said, you got bullet holes? Yes, sir, I got bullet holes. So here it was, we had built this house, we had closed on it. Not 24 hours had passed before there were bullet holes in the sides of both homes that we built. Now, if it were just the residents of the community who did this to themselves, you'd say, well, you know, tough. But I don't think it was. I think it is a core principle of the Democratic Party to periodically cause these paroxysms of violence within these communities in order to put everyone else on the defensive and for electoral advantage. And I remember during the George Floyd uprisings, going to the grocery stores, and there would be, this is at a time when there were mobs just burning cities, and even here in Virginia, and I found it very interesting that I would have Black customers in the grocery store with me who would go out of their way to come over, and you know, maybe I'm searching for something, and they say, "Oh, could I help you? Could I help you?" And I felt I was getting a clear message. They didn't know who I was. I'm just some gray-haired guy, but they're going out of their way to say, I'm not like this. I'm not one of those people. I'm not part of this violence and hatred. And to me, that was a very encouraging thing. And I think the Democrats have got to revise their way of doing things. One of the reasons, and not certainly the only reason, but one of the big reasons that the inner cities have stayed so dysfunctional for most of my lifetime is that they're constantly being burned to the ground by groups who are promoted by the Democratic Party and are prompted to go out and commit violence. So it's a very sad thing, but in any event, I just thought I would respond to E.J. Dionne's Washington Post article, because I find it so frustrating that the Democrats would instigate this entire violent movement that's killed some 14,000 excess people, excess murders beyond what would be the norm. And then you have this fellow having the nerve to say, the good news about murder is that somehow the reason that it has gone down is because of the wonderful things that we've done as the Democratic Party. I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to touch on this, and a lot of people forget. Just with the news cycle, it's constantly evolving and throwing new things at you. So to remember what happened during that time, there's a reporter. He's I wouldn't say he's a reporter on the stage of like Seymour Hersh or even a Max Blumenthal, but he reported or curated this documentary on the killing in Kenosha, which started the riots there, led to the narrative after the Kyle Rittenhouse whole event unfolded, where you had the media really portraying him as this white racist and putting his life in jeopardy when he was a minor who happened to get caught up in some nasty things, and the people that he ended up defending himself against were also white males, which I found ironic that the media always shielded themselves from that, or making that clear to the public, because it diverged from the official story of maligning this young man.
To interrupt you just a second, much of the leadership of the Black Lives Matter Antifa grouping were very wealthy young liberals who lived in mansions behind the gates, and they came out and they led mobs in burning down the black cities. They didn't go and say, okay, hey, look, my mom and dad are really privileged. Okay, they live in a $10 million home. They have gates, they have guards around. Let's go burn those things down. No, none of those burned down. The homes in the Hamptons, nobody came and terrorized them. Where they went, and that they always do. They always go after the black, the inner city businesses and so forth. And I can't tell you, I mean, there have been hundreds and hundreds of major business outlets, Target stores and different McDonald's, all kinds of places that have shut down in these inner cities. And the good members of those communities are left without places to eat, places to bank, places to get medicine and groceries and things like that. But it is the liberal white, and there are privileged people. I'm not privileged, you're not privileged, but I'm going to tell you, there are privileged people who live behind those gated walls with their mansions, and they walk into Harvard and they walk into Yale, and life is all charted out for these dudes. Mm-hmm. I'm not one of them. I went for 2 weeks when I was a high school kid, and there was no food and there was no money that came. There's supposed to be a check that'd come in the mail, and I took care of my little sister, and we lived for 2 weeks on bread, and we had milk. There was actually milk that came to the house, but I discovered that you could take dried heels of bread and you could put catsup on them. We happened to have a bottle of catsup, and we lived on bread and catsup for 2 weeks. Oh. And you could do it. Life goes on. But somehow I became privileged all of a sudden. My big job when I was, I joined the Marines, I made $72 a month, not an hour, not a day, not a week, $72 a month. we were fed, we were housed, and you weren't considered as needing any money. I did it voluntarily. I mean, I volunteered, but it drives me nuts when people start referring to an entire race of people as being privileged. There is a privileged group. There is a group that has the power to control the media, that they have the power they're being groomed to run the banks, to run the whole thing. And so I'm not saying there aren't privileged people, but privilege is not us.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also erases the memory and the history of members of great American leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. And what his what he proclaimed is, you judge someone by the character instead of the color of their skin, and and that it seems like we're erasing that when we say, okay, this one class that fits this shade is automatically this oppressor or this oppressed. It's very demeaning, I feel, to darker skinned Americans, all the progress and the sacrifice that their ancestors have made to get to the point where we are today. And I do find that it neglects a lot of critical thinking when you put it in that aspect. I mean, there are always things that we can better in America, and for for us to allow the media to engage in those tactics, divide us in this manner, and create such a division. Especially, it always happens near election season, so
Yeah.
it's highly criminal, and it's important that we do shed focus on it. I often think that a lot of what we got from these BLM protests and riots was more surveillance. So I kind of found that was the end game in that, is you have a lot of these high our oligarchs or whatever that get a lot of money when they surveil us, and what better to do that through scaring the public in this manner and provoking these actions. So that's kind of what my mind goes to, because that's kind of what it seems has come out 4 to 5 years later. So that's what I often
Well, that's true. That does happen. When I was in high school, I used to take the Miami Transit bus to school, and I would get on the bus, and there was a sign over the bus driver above him, and it said "colored to the rear," and in the back of the bus there was a row of seats, and it said "colored only," and it troubled me so deeply, because it seemed so demeaning to, and by colored they meant the blacks. That's what was colored in those days. And so I was a painfully shy kid, and but I just one day just started walking towards the back, and there were a group of black workmen back there, and I said, "Sir," I said, "may I have a seat?" And so I began riding in the colored only section of the bus, which was the only thing I could do to take a stand against this. And I was the only white person that ever did that, and in the time that I saw. But there were a lot of very good people who took a stand and said, "Look, people should be treated treated like people, treated different, But I mean, I never had the idea of communism, the idea that everybody would succeed equally. There are people who have enormous capabilities, and there are people who don't, and typically that's the way things fall out. But I believe that everybody should be treated with dignity and fairness, and I always did that throughout my life, and I still believe it. And I don't think that we should simply flip the coin, which unfortunately we did. We went from you know, very badly mistreating people to flipping the coin, and then there was a lot of mistreatment in the opposite direction. And
Mhm.
I think the Trump administration has done magnificent work in restoring the original meaning of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which said no discrimination based on race, on color, on sex, on national origin. And it took Trump and Attorney General Bondi and Harmeet Dillon, who's the head of the Civil Rights Division, to remind us that the words of the Civil Rights Act don't say a particular race, a particular sex, a particular religion, a particular national origin. It wasn't designed to raise up a new sort of privilege. It was designed to say, okay, we're not going to discriminate against people. And even white people have a race, even Americans have a national origin. So you can't simply single out and say, well, we're going to call these people oppressors from now on, and we're going to train children to, you know, to rough them up a little bit on the playground. You can't do that. So,
Mhm.
so
Oh,
we're making some progress.
yeah, it reminds me of there was a young woman who around the civil rights movement. She was a teacher, Jane Elliott. She did this brown eye, blue eye experiment. But the crazy thing that came out of that was when you, I think it was the brown eyed people were the superior one. And so they would demean the blue eyed people in the class. And she said that she would see these students like just become shells of themselves. So when you see that happens, now that we flip the coin, we have to be vigilant of that. That's, when you tell someone that, oh, they're awful human beings because of what maybe their ancestors have done, you're not being the greatest member of society. I think when you project that. And so I think about that experiment because sometimes we lose the actual meaning and message that maybe that experiment or what came out of the civil rights movement was supposed to be about. Instead of So I just wanted to make that statement before we ended the show today.
Sure.
As
Okay.
always.
Well, we've run long, but there's a lot going on. So anyway, I guess we'll gather again next week.
Certainly, sir. Yes, and I would encourage everyone to join us next week to focus on the news.